All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today is David Hornik. How are you doing?
Great, thanks.
David Hornik's just back from the lobby. We'll explain what that is in a second. But his early background is kind of like you're kind of like a Tom Wolfe villain. You go to Cambridge, Stanford, Harvard, go to work at Cravath, Swaine and Moore. Is that you couldn't
That's true. That's true. I probably should have then joined the CIA, or maybe I was in the CIA the entire time.
Could you not get a job at Skadden Arps? Was that?
Oh man, Cravath is offended.
Oh wait, I wasn't on Skadden Arps, Slate, Migger, and Frome.
Yeah. Exactly.
Ends up somehow being a venture capitalist at August Capital, hugely successful with things like Fastly, Splunk, GitLab. There's a million more. But how does this what is this crazy fast, and I know there's more to it than that, but that's a crazy fast start you've got there with those. Those are some pretty pedigreed.
Yeah, look, I actually talk about this a lot with the young people, because for a lot of years I was just building a resume, right? I wasn't focused on necessarily what was I excited about, what was I going to do, but was really just what's the next brand.
And that's a help for people who don't know. Cravath, Swaine, Moore is you can't afford them.
Yeah. I always say they're the law firm you hire when money is no object and you have to win.
Yeah.
Right. And before that, I clerked on the Second Circuit. And then I will say that I did fail. I ultimately applied to clerk for the Supreme Court, and I was not of sufficient pedigree for that.
Man.
So, that was the beginning of the end.
A loss for history, I'm sure.
Highly unlikely. But anyway, look, ultimately, it was me pursuing the things that I was excited about.
Yeah.
I got to Stanford in part because I was a computer music fanatic. I was very excited about music technologies, and they had this place called CARMA, the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, and it was the center for computer music in the country. And even though I came to Stanford thinking, I'll go do pre-med and pre-law, I found myself spending all my time up on the hill, making noise. Yeah. And that was amazing. And then I hadn't spent time in Europe, and I wanted to spend some time. I didn't do a year abroad, and so I got this fellowship, and I got to go spend time in Cambridge and said, well, what am I interested in? And at the time, I thought I was going to be a public defender, so I studied criminology. Yeah. And that was amazing, actually. Then I went to law school because I was this argumentative little Jewish guy, and so that seemed like a required. Right. And truthfully, Harvard Law School has a reputation, and in some regards that's fine, but I had a great time. I was the musical director of the Drama Society, and I was teaching legal writing and running orientation, and I just did a lot of things that one wouldn't think of for law school. So even though I did these very predictable kind of resume padding things along the way, I really did the things that were exciting to me, and I had a good time.
Do you know who David Stutz is?
Yeah, for sure.
Is that funny? So he's the only other guy I know who majored in music and computers.
Yeah.
And he did so at a company college called Occidental in LA.
Yep.
He then went on to play Jesus Christ in the road company of Jesus Christ Superstar, and then went to be a top technical advisor to Bill Gates, and I think he now owns a large portion of the state of Washington.
I didn't know that Stutz had been in Jesus Christ Superstar. I would have given nearly anything to be that good, to be on stage. Well, but unfortunately, as you can hear, I wasn't the most. I would have had to have been a character actor at best.
Think about it. It's like baseball, but I kind of went to Northwestern theater stuff, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
With the podcast, not on Broadway. I went to school with Dave Schwimmer, and he turns out he was better than me. Yeah. But think about the best person in your school. You go to the school play, and they're great. Then you go to Northwestern, the best person, the play. There's 1,000 of those, and the best of them is on Broadway.
Yeah. It's nuts. Yeah. No, crazy.
You've done some Broadway investing, right?
That is true, actually.
What showed you?
Most recently, you should go see. I just invested in Slave Play, which this is an incredible play that's open on Broadway now, and then The Inheritance, which opens in a couple of weeks, another incredible play. Slave Play, talking about race relations in a very edgy but interesting way, and then The Inheritance is talking about gay rights and the legacy of sort of the survivors and the not survivors of the AIDS crisis. Right. So both are super interesting. And then before that, I was fortunate to invest in Hadestown, which
that's fantastic.
Yeah, and is an amazing show. Won the Tony for Best Musical last year.
You know what you should have invested in?
What is that?
You should have invested in Hamilton.
Well, I tried.
You did?
I did. I saw Hamilton very early on.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of the Public Theater, and and Hamilton was debuting at the Public. I saw it and said, "This is an amazing show." I had the fortune of investing in Avenue Q, which is a wonderful show, yes. Yeah. And the folks who were involved in Avenue Q were tangentially involved in Hamilton. I reached out and said, I love this show. Yeah. I would love to participate. It turned out that there was very little room for anyone to participate in investing in Hamilton.
I saw, life lessons like being Jesus Christ Superstar and then go work for Bill Gates. But I saw an interview with the producer of Hamilton. He's like, yeah, it's funny. When I was 30, I produced Rent. And everyone said to me, enjoy it, man. This is as good as it's going to get.
Well, it's funny in the venture world. I remember thinking when I joined the venture world, I just need one great hit, and and so just one Splunk, and then I invested in this amazing company. I was the earliest investor in Splunk, which turned out to be this very interesting big business, now $20 billion public company, and so. From then forward, I'd say just one more Splunk before I die, you know, and so it's been fun. I have Fastly that's been a public company for a handful of months, is doing great work, and another one that just I can't really talk about, and then GitLab, which is is just a machine. So you just never know what the world is going to hand you.
Well, it's funny if you think of Hamilton, it's sort of like this archetypical startup story in that Lin-Manuel was a second-time entrepreneur. He'd already done it with In the Heights. He does a minimal viable product, which is he's got like 14 hot bars, which he sings for Barack Obama, who seems to like them.
That helps.
And then he goes and does his Beta, which is his off-Broadway, and they make a lot of changes. And there's a whole mixtape of things that got cut. Yeah. And then they're on Broadway, and somebody's making some money.
Yeah, no, and it's an amazing show. And look, the thing that's exciting, and I have a kid who's an aspiring Broadway composer, so I follow this stuff. And there are a few shows out there that have made musical theater composers a ton of money, despite the fact that it's a wildly thankless profession where the vast majority of people do not make a living, right? So I think that's like every other creative endeavor. Millions of people who would love to do it, and a few who succeed, and then this sort of dream that you two could be Lin-Manuel Miranda, who, by the way, I mean, the nice thing about that is Lin-Manuel Miranda's just the loveliest human alive, right? Yeah. So if you're going to root for someone, you might as well root for Lin.
Yeah, could not have happened to a nicer guy. What do you bring that as an analogy to Silicon Valley of the? I've had a few people on talking about depression in Silicon Valley, and one of the reasons for that, the woman who wrote the book Startup Landia, is that not only is the type of person who goes into starting a company 3 times more likely to have different anxiety disorders, but they're in this world where the appearance is that 100% of people are just killing it at their companies, when in fact all startups, they almost always fail, just like Broadway musicals almost always fail. And yet people go to Broadway thinking, I'm the next, my rap musical about, whatever.
About Washington. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, Truman, a rap musical. Is there something similar there? And is there what's your sense of that?
Yeah, I'm sure. Right. I mean, I do think that entrepreneurs are artists in their own right. Right. They're really creating something out of whole cloth, and despite the illusion of this is easy and look what happens, you automatically become this giant thing, and it really is hard. And if you look at the number of companies that get started, it really does round to zero when it comes to the ones that are successful. It's why those of us who have been in the industry and have seen success, have seen companies that have gone from 3 to 3,000, et cetera, know that it's magic.
It's a miracle.
Right. So I mean, I was having a conversation with one of the CEOs I backed and was saying, this is really hard. And I have known multiple CEOs to be on antidepressants, right? Yeah. To your point earlier, because the pressure is immense. The number of, kind of kicks in the gut is near constant, et cetera. And on the other hand, it's also just the most amazing thing when it works, right? So I think people keep coming back because it's all they can do. Yep. Not because it's like the only thing I'm qualified to do, but just because it's the only thing they want to do. And then they have to deal with this fact that, gosh, it's really hard.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, some days I wake up and I think, in all the world and all the planet, of all the places that things are being created, it's here. Like this, I think James Curry has called it like be in the capital city. Like this is where it all is. If you're
one fine day in the Emerald City. Back to our Broadway theme.
If you're,
by the way, that is a good example of why I am not on Broadway. Right there.
There's a lot of jobs on Broadway. You could be an accountant. You could be a producer. You could be a lighting guy.
We digress. An accountant. That's what I need to do. It's definitely the center of gravity of there's lots of people talking about the rest of the world, and I am super excited. We have investments in New York and Chicago and LA and San Diego and Toronto, and we've got them all over the place. Yeah. And yet you sit here where we're speaking, and within 100 miles, there have been multi-billion-dollar companies built with such speed that it's just incomprehensible.
Well, when people have companies are being started all over the world, but when I spend time in like Mexico City or Dublin or whatever, they don't have the same insanity, I guess, as people here. Where someone here will go, oh, yeah, I talked to this guy who's working on this quantum computer, which means he's going to solve every crypto problem in the world at once, and hunger, and I'm curing death. Like, and you don't just say you're an idiot. You go, oh,
how you doing that?
Probably not, but I'm not going to rule it out. Like, it's happened before.
Yeah.
So how did you animate yourself into, you didn't start a company, you went to work for a venture capital firm. How did you animate yourself into that, from criminology, from music? You got back to music, by the way. Good job.
Yeah, on the side. I mean, look, my approach was to engage with amazing people in whatever capacity. And look, and all the things I did, Cravath is full of amazing people. Some of the greatest lawyers in the world are sitting in that tower. And so even in those circumstances, like, oh, what are we doing? I was representing amazing companies with these very thoughtful CEOs, and basically throughout all of it, my motto was, how can I be helpful to other great people? How can I be helpful to these great people who are out there who are trying to do important things? And that worked in the law. I was a litigator, and then I came out here to start representing startups. And I was like, oh my God, these startups are just a conglomeration of really enthusiastic, smart individuals who think that there's a problem they can solve.
Right.
And that was completely intoxicating. I was like, oh, great. How can I help?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you're a lawyer. I'm like, no. I'm happy to do that. But what else can I do? Yeah. Like, what more can I do for you? And that really worked. That helped me to spend time in these companies and give advice and make introductions. And ultimately I was doing things like, interviewing candidates for executive roles, right, and do all sorts of things that were just the byproduct of saying, hey, is there something I can do to help you? What would make your lives easier?
And how did you never have the hubris the rest of us do to go, I could go do that better. I'm going to start a company.
Yeah. It's just never really been my thing. Maybe it would have been great. I think companies are amazing, right. Exactly.
In my experience,
it probably would have failed, right? It's hard.
Yeah.
No, I just thought, like, look at, I'm a good cast member. Put me in the company, and I'll help you. And that worked, right? I mean, ultimately, I met a lot of amazing people. I made a lot of connections, and said, what is it you need most? And maybe I can be helpful there.
It's true. As I worked at different companies, I realized I wasn't a very good alpha dog. Like, I wasn't that guy. I I could understand the music when someone else, when Mozart was like, here's what it is. I'm like, oh, that's good. But I couldn't write it myself. And I was like, I'm better like, Sheryl Sandberg's a little bit like that. Like, I'm really good at making Mark Zuckerberg's vision happen, but I'm not going to go tell you what the future looks like.
There are not a lot of people who can tell you what the future will look like. And I
a lot can tell you.
No, I was going to say, there are lots of venture capitalists who, if you ask them, right, in January 2nd, they sit down and go like, all right, what's happening this year? And here are the things, whatever. And I always find that completely mystifying. Like, if you know that, go do it, right?
For sure.
It seems silly to say like, okay, I've figured it out. Now I've got to go find other people who are going to do this thing. I'd take a very different view, which is, good morning. It's, January 2nd, another amazing year. What are you folks working on?
Yeah.
Right? Like, wow, that's amazing, right? I didn't even, when I funded Fastly, it wasn't like, oh, I know that we need to disrupt the CDN space and build something infrastructure business that'll better deliver content. It's like they described this business. It was like, oh my God, why hasn't someone built that?
And even if I think sometimes the future is, it's just like a little bit of an angle off. Like I did a failed check-in company. Check-ins was a big thing for a while.
Yeah,
because the phone would let you would know where you were. And everyone was doing check-in apps, and they were drawing this logical line down the road of like, well, you can check in, therefore you can do loyalty and all kinds of things. The answer was actually, you can tell a car where you are, and you should create Uber.
Right.
But that's not super... Like, everybody was going down the super logical path, and some other guy was like, nah.
Yeah, no, someone else was like, I just wish a car would pick me up. Wait, my phone knows where I am. I always joke, like, tracking children, we used to think like, oh, how are we going to do that in the future? And then we gave them this device that they leave in their pocket. Right. Now I know where you are. Like, you wouldn't leave it behind.
It's perfect. So how you've said publicly that you are dyslexic. How do you get through, like, this career is, whatever you want to call it, pretty good, pretty academic. How did you?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that the volume of reading is sort of immense, right? I mean, I get hundreds of emails a day. I have to respond to them. I have to write back.
Right.
One trick is I have this great font called Dyslexie, which makes it easier to read, although it then screws up the formatting of every email and it's very whatever. So that's not a great solution. But the more important solution is that the venture business is, to my mind, is really about hearing what amazing people think, having them educate you, asking other amazing people for their opinions, then aggregating those thoughts and coming to a conclusion. And you can do much of that without reading a word, right? And the other advantage is that dyslexics are good at distilling information without having the full picture, right? I mean, it's because we have to.
Right.
And so there are a lot of people in the venture business like, oh my God, I don't have enough information to make a decision. I'm like, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Right. I got as much information as I'm going to get.
Yeah.
But look at, none of it has been easy in that regard. Law school was certainly the stupidest thing, right? My first year of law school was just spent an unimaginable number of hours trying to stay up with the reading until I figured it out. Yeah. Once I figured out how to game the system, then I could read very little, and I got better grades. But that first year, since I didn't know what it was, I had to actually do the work, and the work took me 3 times as long.
When did you learn you were dyslexic? When was that?
I was in 3rd grade.
Okay, so pretty early.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess at this point I should probably know if they declared it dyslexia or what. But basically, I got to a new elementary school, and I had an older sister and a younger brother. And when we got to the school, they were, oh, look, we'll put you in this learning center and, quote unquote gifted program. And they ignored me.
Right.
And my mom, being a great Jewish mother, was like, what? I have another son.
You need to fight for your kid.
So then they did a bunch of testing. They're like, well, yeah, he's got some talents, but there's some problems here, which was very helpful, because then I spent a lot of years with frankly, with my mother being the coach and the person who was able to help me compensate for, for these challenges.
Right. Yeah, I had the woman on who wrote the book about Startup Landia couldn't read till she was like 22.
Wow.
Now has a super successful company, has written a book. And I was asking her why so many dyslexic people, a lot of times somebody will be hugely successful and they'll just mention, dyslexic. I was like, why is that? And she said, well, one idea is that before you know it, you learn all these coping mechanisms, how to read people, how to mimic things, these skills. Then you learn to read. But you don't lose the skills you develop beforehand. So you have this kind of little bit of a empathy that was generated by the issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always talk about dyslexia like any other different ability, where if you were blind, you end up generating a much better sense of hearing to compensate for blindness. And so, or whatever. And what she's describing is, imagine that, where you couldn't see until you're 22, you get this incredible sense of hearing, and then suddenly you can see. Yeah. It's like, oh, well, that's a real competitive advantage. And what I'd say is, you can't see as well. So it's not, you never quite get there. But maybe if becomes 1.5 times the value instead of because you've added this additional skill. So I've always found it to be it is challenging. I mean, the thing that is most annoying to me. Annoying is unfair, but look, smart people talk about reading all the time. You go and have conversations. They say, "Have you read this book? Have you read this book?" etc. And my answer is almost always no. When the answer is yes, it's because I've listened to it. And listening is really slow. And yes, it is true that you can train your brain to listen to things on 2 and 3x if you're really focused or whatever. Yeah. That's horrible. I have to say, it's a very tiring and unpleasant experience to listen to things on multiple speeds for me. And so, this is just a time thing. Like, my life already is too complicated, has too many things, and I'm trying to figure out how to get more time, not spend more time. And, so that part is sort of a bummer.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel now? I mean, you've been a venture capitalist for a while in this amazing place. How do you feel like it's evolved? Kind of like you've evolved. There's a lot of venture firms, but you've managed to stand out in a particular way. Let me say that you blogged early. Yeah. You had a podcast early, which I liked. I thought it was funny. I don't know.
I should get back to that.
You should. I mean, if you want to. If not, it's fine. But you've done something really interesting, which is start a thing called The Lobby. Yeah. What was The Lobby? And like, why is it? It's something that's important to a lot of people, it seems like.
Yeah. I guess when I got to the venture business, as you said, like, who was I to be a venture capitalist? That was kind of it. It was like, I'd been an attorney. Some people met me and were like, well, maybe you'd be a good venture capitalist. Actually, when they hired me, I was told, lawyers suck at this. You'll probably fail, but we kind of like you. And so we'll see how it goes.
Right. They probably told Mike Mort's journalists sucked too.
Yeah, so, probably. And I'm sure Mike ignored that. I was sort of like, okay, well, I like this, but what does it mean, right? What is it to be a VC? And part of it is, when you arrive at a venture firm having never been a venture capitalist, you don't actually know half of what it is. You don't know that the lion's share of what's being done is not the stuff that's visible. It's a lot of talking to lots and lots of people and trying to decide what's interesting and making choices, oftentimes terribly. Yeah. And so I got here saying like, I just need to meet more people. Like, I want people to tell me what they're working on, but I need to have relationships with more people so they'll introduce me to their friends. And so I started going to a bunch of conferences. I started, podcasting and blogging, saying like, hey, here's some thoughts and tell me what you're thinking about. Right. Here's how I don't know why people think the venture business is this black box. Here's what I know about it. It doesn't seem so black boxy, There were people who were very upset about that when I started blogging, because they're like, no, venture is a secret. And I'm like, I don't know what you think the secret is, but it seems to me it's not so secret.
The secret is I make it a lot of money, and I don't want other people to know how I'm doing it.
Exactly, because it's like, it's not that. You're like, as I always say, like, my job at its purest is I take money from someone and I hand it to someone else. Like, what's the secret there?
As an entrepreneur, when I learned how much venture capitalists were making, as they were like, we all need to cut back here and, whatever. And, I'm not, and when they talked about how poor they were, I realized they were talking compared to Mark Zuckerberg. When I realized what they're actually making, I was like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah, the venture business is a great deal.
Yeah, do not complain about
my only defense of the venture business, and it is a defense, is that ultimately I only make a fraction of what I make for others, right? And so, in the end, if I am successful, I've made a whole lot of money that will go into scholarships to colleges and things. But anyone who's like, oh man,
you're not a social worker in Oakland, is all I'm saying.
No, totally. Oh, I totally get it. I totally get it. Anyway, so I thought, look, the venture business is a people business. To me, it was a people business, and I think that there are those who've entered the venture business and think of it like the financial services industry, and they think that what they engage in is are transactions. And I did not believe that at all. I believe that what we engage in is relationships. I believe what we engage in is long-term and valuable. And so I said, well, how can I go about meeting more great people? Because they're the people who tell me what they're working on. They're the people I lean on to describe, to help me vet ideas. And frankly, the things that energize me. Like I am the most profoundly extroverted extrovert. I get power from being with amazing people.
You're the Bill Clinton of Silicon Valley.
That must be it. Give or take a whole lot of things. And so, I was going to all these conferences and I'm like, I don't get these conferences. They don't make sense. I want to meet people and I'm sitting in a dark room. And so it was even worse. In many instances, I'd end up getting into the dark room and I'd be sitting next to people. I'd chat with the people next to me. Then people would start talking and I would be like, I'd rather just talk to the people next to me. People would shush me and I'd make jokes. And then finally I'd have to leave. And so I spent all of my time in the lobby. And I'd be at these conferences. I'd pay, thousands of dollars to go to the conference. And all I'd do is hang out in the lobby chatting with people. And they'd be like, oh, I got to go here, so-and-so. I'd be like, have fun. Right. And someone else would come out and I'd chat with them. So eventually I was like, okay, that's just dumb. Why don't you just have a conference that's about the lobby, that's about these conversations, that's about relationships and discussion, et cetera. And so I finally built it. And it's an unconference. It's a gathering of 250 of the thought leaders in a particular space. I actually have two now. I have one in the digital media space, and I have one that's called Lobby Enterprise, and it's around SaaS and enterprise and payments. And you just try and get amazing people to show up. Yeah. And then you say, what do you want to talk about? And they tell you a set of things they want to talk about. And then you put a bunch of infrastructure around it so they can eat well and relax and let down their defenses. And then the conversations are really genuine, really valuable. The relationships you build are fantastic. And so it's been fun, and it's allowed me to just sort of also exercise some of my creative side by creating, ridiculousness at these events. And so we've had 13 consumer lobbies and 6 enterprise, something like that. And
also I've been to a couple. I went to the hurricane one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great sign of focus to get into a hurricane for a conference.
Yeah, well, it was on conference, so I had to be there. And it's lovely. Like there's a real intimacy. You do things beforehand so people can prepare. You learn what books people like or what music, more than the 5 investments they've made. I think it's a very cool, a very cool event.
No, I appreciate it.
Are you going to keep doing? Is it anything where you're like, geez, I'm getting.
It is a lot of work. It's definitely a lot of work, and I have done a lot of them. I was sort of at about number 7 or 8, I was like, holy cow, this is a lot of work. And then I was like, well, I got to get to 10.
Yeah.
Then I had the 10th, and it was a really fun celebration. And I was like, well, I've made it to 10. And people like it. I think people would be disappointed. When people start telling me they're not, they don't want to come back to it, then it'll be easy. Yeah. In the meantime, I'm busy. I just sent out the lobby, which is Lobby Digital, happened last week. Right. I flew back on the weekend, and I sent out invitations to Lobby Enterprise on Monday. So it is a little bit of a treadmill, but super exciting.
Does it accrue? I'm getting to one very particular joke here. But does it accrue the value to your firm, to Silicon Valley? You're creating value as a public good. I mean, the people who have connected, invested, built businesses together may not be documented, but it's obviously true. I mean, I work in an office. Rick Morini and Jeff Bonfort sit next to me. They're building business. They've been to a bunch of lobbies. But as an investment thing, you should have invested in everybody who went to the first lobby, dropped the mic, and walked away, right?
Had I done that, I would have been the greatest venture capitalist to ever live.
Yep.
Truly. I mean, because in those early days, we had folks who were, early founders of Facebook and LinkedIn and blah, whatever, everything, Zynga and whatever. But again, that's on me, right? I have relationships with lots of smart people. They tell me about their businesses, right? And yet, if I fail to fund them, that's on me. But people, by and large, people tell me about great companies. They do. I build these relationships. They do appreciate it, and they also look. In the end, you can't just be the guy who throws a party. You actually have to be a good venture capitalist, right? And so I have to simultaneously build a reputation, a well-earned reputation as someone who goes to bat for my companies and is thoughtful and engaging and helps them be successful. And then when I gather people around, that can be the conversation
right.
instead of just like Hornik throws a great party. And so I do think over 20 years. I have been able to at least be helpful and valuable to a bunch of folks. And so I think that the lobby is sort of a multiplicative event.
Yeah. One of the things that has animated this podcast is I talk to people about inclusion in Silicon Valley. Ellen Powell came on and talked about her experience, Charles Hudson, African-American venture capitalist. And a lot of it's been me sort of playing the fool, which is I would say to a woman, sexual harassment doesn't really happen that much. There's some form of that. And she would come on the podcast and be like, okay, so here's what happened yesterday afternoon. And Charles, tells me his experience. I had a woman who talked about raising transgender children in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Which came from me being a fool. I was talking to her before the pod, just at drinks, and she said, "Oh, my 3-year-old's transgender." And I was like, I made some joke like, "How does your 3-year-old know that? They don't know if they want to be an astronaut." She was like, "Oh boy, you're wrong. I'm going to come on your podcast and tell you."
Yeah.
So, I've been learning, hopefully along with everybody else, but you spend some time with the LGBTQ community.
Yep.
You're on the board of GLAAD.
Yep.
Where does that, and what I've learned too is being African-American and being a woman, like I just talked to Dan Scheidman about ageism. They're very different forms of discrimination, wrong in all of their forms, but very different.
Right.
What is the LGBTQ piece that you think is problematic in Silicon Valley, or is it problematic? Is there a gay mafia and it's fine?
No, it's wildly problematic everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I think that despite making a ton of progress, the world is wildly discriminatory. And the thing that's most depressing, so GLAAD is an LGBTQ advocacy organization, works with the media to help accelerate the acceptance of the community and also intersectionality, trying to be valuable to across the board for underrepresented folks. And one of the things that we do is we survey, the American populace to try and understand what their attitudes are towards the LGBTQ community. Ask them questions like, would you be comfortable if one of your coworkers had a same-sex marriage wedding photo on their desk? Like, the idea that would make anyone uncomfortable is just absurd to me, and yet it is the case for many Americans. And so the most troubling thing to me, because I thought when I joined the GLAAD board, and I've been on the board now for 6 years, when I joined the board, we were making really great progress on gay marriage and equality, and it sort of felt like, oh, look at mission accomplished.
What could go wrong?
And then obviously this current administration, despite pretending to be anything but the most hostile administration to LGBTQ people in recent history, has been truly detrimental. But the thing that has been most disheartening is that when you ask the American populace how they feel about gay people, about trans people, about queer people, the millennials have gotten decidedly less supportive over the last handful of years.
Really?
And I used to think, in fact, when I joined the board, when you join the GLAD board, you just say, like, here's a letter of intent that says, here's why I'm interested. And in my letter of interest in joining the board, I said, I think that this is a problem that goes away with time. If you look at young people, they are absolutely disinterested in discrimination against you based on your your sexuality, your whether you're LGBTQ, et cetera. But I said, I'm impatient, and I want to speed that process along. But I think that time will solve this problem. Well, it looks like time won't solve this problem in the same way that you would think that time would solve sexism and time would solve racism. It's not solving this problem, right? And so we need to be proactive, and we need to make clear that there are people who are trying to take away the rights of individuals. For reasons that are associated with things that have nothing to do with who they are, right? Right. That they have no choice in the matter. Right. So I got involved in GLAD because I thought it was the most important civil rights organization of the day, and that's become increasingly clear to me. And we've been working hard to try and counteract this administration and try and support the freedoms and rights of people broadly, and now to work with other organizations ultimately to pass a modern equal rights amendment that says that no one can be discriminated against based on anything, race and sex and gender and identity, et cetera.
Yeah, it's got to be such a backslide from. My dad was gay, but not openly gay. He was in his 50s and 60s. You don't do that. You fake a marriage, and then finally in his 50s or 60s, just the war, right? 50s or 60s, comes out, gets in a relationship. Then the AIDS thing happens when in San Francisco, young men are dying in the 90s. Finally, that gets solved. So you would think there was some trajectory from, my dad could have been gay today, like he couldn't be in the 50s.
Right.
But a backslide is...
It's disheartening. It's really shocking. My oldest son is gay, and is in many ways a gay rights advocate. He writes music about being gay. He's and he's grown up in Palo Alto and in the Bay Area in a very open and accepting family and community, et cetera. And yet he still talks about discrimination. He still talks about the loneliness and the challenges, et cetera. And so I think that it is a challenge, and the thing that I am most interested in solving is this idea that we can help LGBTQ youth feel accepted, feel loved, allow them to be their best selves as themselves, right? How does a 3-year-old trans individual know he or she is trans? How did we know we were gay or straight, right? Yeah. I mean, these things are innate, and helping people to embrace themselves as who they are, and then helping this entire country to allow people to thrive in their very best selves is important.
Are the groups, are the LGBTQ are not the same things at all? In fact, every one of those things is like T's got, like RuPaul is mad at T, I think, like that kind of thing. Like, are they together on this, or is there like a dissent among those groups? Or
look, I think you can always come up with differences of opinion about issues. Mm-hmm. I think that what is clear if you are sitting at GLAD is that underrepresented communities that are facing the pressures of societal pressures that the LGBTQ community faces need to unify. We need to stand together. The differences are so infinitesimally small compared to the shared challenges, and so it's why GLAD is so focused on intersectionality. It's same is true of the Latinx community today, and then if you are a transgender person who is Black or Latinx or whatever, you're doubly challenged, and the suicide rates and the murder rates for transgender people of color
it's crazy.
is so profoundly horrifying in ways that are so wildly un-American that I think that whatever differences there may be, I think that we all come together to say, look, we have a bigger mission here.
I always ask, at least in Silicon Valley, what is an advocate to do if you are straight, white, not thinking about it all day long? Same with women. Like, I'm not a woman, but what do I do? Do I just shut the hell up? And is it none of my business, or do I?
I mean, I wish we all knew. I mean, at the end of the day, my answer is to be purposeful, right? It is not sufficient, I think, to say, this is a problem. I think one has to say this is a problem that needs to be addressed, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I've done that in the LGBTQ community by being engaged and working closely with an organization that is trying to make a change. But you talked about the lobby earlier, and I had a moment when I realized that the lobby was a really broken, problematic event. Because the truth was that when I started it, I was not purposeful. I didn't focus on anything to do with, with representation in my conference, and the byproduct was, unsurprisingly, a bunch of white men. Mm-hmm. The first lobby, now 13 years ago, was a bunch of white men, and it took me being very purposeful to say, like, that's unacceptable, and then the lobby's better. It's not perfect. In fact, a friend of mine said that she was speaking with an African American gentleman at the lobby, and he said, and she's like, "How are you doing?" He said, "It's really white here."
Yeah. And
I was like, it was so disheartening to hear that. Not because he's wrong; he's not wrong, but because, like, yes, I need to fix that problem. I need to fix, So the gender balance has gotten much better at the lobby. I think that the LGBTQ representation is quite strong at the lobby, but but people of color are still underrepresented, and I need to be purposeful and I need to be focused. And in particular, what I've learned is that communities are powerful, right? That networks are powerful, and it is easy to wield this community that I've helped to aggregate. Without any mindfulness, to just say, no, this is about digital media, this is about whatever. And so we're going to gather those people who are the leaders, whatever that means. And great, as I said, you got the white men who came together and made each other richer. But the opportunity to bring in folks who otherwise wouldn't have those networks and make them a part of this community is disproportionately valuable to them. Yeah. And that has been the real joy of the lobby, is making sure that its community has a broader footprint and has a broader impact.
Yeah. A couple more things and we'll get out of here. But what as people look at Silicon Valley from the outside and they see things like Theranos or WeWork, is there like something going wrong here? Like these seem like just too many people, including me, like such obviously ridiculous failures. Has something crept in that ain't quite right, or what?
Yeah, I think it's obvious. I think that the answer is that that when it's about money, then it can get broken very quickly, right? And it's always about money. Obviously, venture capital, my job is to invest money and turn it into more money. Yep. But for the companies that I focus on and the entrepreneurs who are building them, it's about change, and it's about building something and making the planet better, et cetera. And is that the primary objective? Is the primary objective to create more money? But in these instances where the markets get red hot and people's moral compasses point towards money instead of innovation, they point towards profits instead of creating a better planet. These things happen. Yeah. And the hotter the market is, the better, the more likely someone with the wrong compass and investors with the wrong focus, et cetera, will come along and create this idea that, look, money uber alles. And I think, I did read, quote unquote, Bad Blood. It's an amazing book, fascinating book. And I was infuriated infuriated constantly by the complete and utter neglect of every person who invested in that company, right? There's just no circumstance in which an executive fires multiple executives and no one says anything.
Yep.
Like, that's just insane. There's no circumstance in which, money is raised willy-nilly without any kind of accountability. It's just, that was such negligence on the part of the investors in that company.
Yeah.
And, so I think that's the problem. I think that there's this the opportunity, the idea that you become this shooting star and become infinitely wealthy or whatever is so alluring to some of the worst elements.
Yes.
And it is our obligation to make sure that that's tempered with the capital and the oversight and all of those things.
Yes. So what happens next? I would say you've won at venture capital. you August is going along. You kind of took a pause on the latest fund as things are what's going on? What's next there?
Look, I think that one of the nice things about having been at this for 20 years is that you get to see what's happening out there in the market, and you get to and you can take a pause. You can say, like, look, let's focus on the stuff that's important, like getting these companies successful, right? I mean, I'm going to have, over an 18-month period, I'm going to have 3 companies go public. That is, it's incomprehensible, truthfully. And so a lot of it was just like, let's focus on the stuff that matters, which is that. And then we'll come back and say, what is the market doing, et cetera. I mean, the good news is I really like the venture business. Lots of people have said to me, so you're going to go do something else. You're going to retire. You're going to blah, whatever. And I don't think so. Like, I just think that this is fun. Yeah. I like working with amazingly smart people who are trying to change the planet.
Yeah, I just had, do you know Maha Ibrahim?
Yeah, of course.
Just had her on. And she was like, 20 years, it's kind of a grind. And she's like, but then in walks somebody and they tell me something and I'm all the way back in. They tell me something about this young entrepreneur about the world. And she's like, nope, I'm not tired at all. Like,
I mean,
this is really cool.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have a great example of this where through a set of circumstances, I met an incredibly smart doctor who turned out to be the chief digital officer, the chief innovation officer at Boston Children's Hospital, and wonderful guy. And I got to know him. Came to the lobby. I actually donated money to his lab because he was working on good problems, et cetera. And in the meantime, he was very entrepreneurial, and at some point kind of had started a thing that he wanted to solve a problem of his. And just recently it was like, David, can I get your advice on fundraising? And he gave me an update, and I was like, well, I have to fund that.
Yeah.
And because I have to fund you. Like, I have always found you to be such a smart, compelling human. You have kept your ears open and your brain open, and this is what you've arrived at, and you're going to solve a real problem in the healthcare world. Let me be a part of that, right? That's amazing. Now, having said that, today, if it goes well, we're talking about 10, 15 years of commitment to working with someone, and that's super exciting to me. That's not daunting to me. That's like, oh my God, I get to work with, Doctor is literally his name. Get to work with Michael Doctor on some hard problem and watch it be successful over the next 10, 15 years. Like, how lucky is that?
Yeah. What else would you do? This is great.
Oh my God. I mean, I don't think I'm qualified to do anything.
That's the problem with venture capital.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I was chatting with someone recently about this because there's a famed VC who went on to be a coach, like an executive coach, and this friend of mine was saying, you should do that.
Jerry Colonna?
Yeah, Jerry.
I just had him on my podcast.
Yeah, so Jerry,
I get around.
Jerry, and people, amazing. And look, Jerry's beloved. And then I sat on a board for a period of time with Coach, with Bill Campbell, who was a famed, sort of confidant of a lot of interesting people, and I think actually that would be a really fun job. I think it would be, I don't know if it's a job, but I think it would be a really fun opportunity to say, look, I'm just here for you.
Yeah.
I'm just here to help you be successful. I think I do that with my companies already with this added, thing where I'm investing right? But if you're Jerry, you get to just say to smart people, how can I help you?
Yeah.
And that's pretty appealing.
It seems like you've done a pretty good job of that. And a lot of people appreciate all your help, and they appreciate the lobby a lot. A lot. That's touched a lot of people in a lot of ways. So how do people get in touch with you or follow you or don't get in touch?
Please get in touch. Actually, I remember when I was, before I had entered the venture business, and I was careful to say I'm not going to reach out to so-and-so because I don't want to bother them. And then I realized as a venture capitalist, no, please tell me what you're working on.
Bother me.
Look, with the caveat that I say no many, many more times than I say yes, but that's part of the job. But no, people can easily get in touch with me. I'm Hornik at augustcap.com. And I'm David Hornik at David Hornik, but Hornik at augustcap.com. Just, shoot me an email if you've got something interesting or you want to ask a question or whatever. I'm happy to do it.
All right. Thanks so much for doing this.
That was great chatting.
All right. This has been the Something About Your podcast.